Good morning to everyone on this first Sunday in September. We thank God for his wonderful blessings and miraculous miracles during this past week. Without a doubt, God is extremely good. Let me pause for a moment to wish my mother a happy birthday. She had her birthday on this past Friday, September the 4th. And I want to say thank you to my awesome mother, Mrs. Bessie Smith. Happy birthday, Mom. So we thank all of you for your prayers and for your presence and for your support week in and week out. And I would like to, for a few minutes, turn your attention to Psalm 118. Psalms number 118, verse 1 and verse 29. Psalms 118, verse 1 and verse 29, and it reads as follows. It reads as follows. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Verse 29. Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. God is good. God is good. This particular psalm is categorized as a psalm of thanksgiving that was usually sang by the parishioners or the congregation in the temple back in David's day. And they would use this psalm as a call to worship. As they entered and processed into the worship setting, they would enter the worship setting singing this particular song. H.J. Krause and L.C. Allen, two biblical scholars, agree it was this psalm that the people usually pulled from to give them encouragement and strength when they went through tough times. It was this song that was sang in the congregation as a song of encouragement, as a song of thanksgiving, thanking God for his goodness and for his love. In this particular psalm, the psalmist really gives us a good insight to what he's up to. It's mentioned twice. It's the same statement mentioned at the beginning and at the end. Verse 1, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. Verse 29, same statement. Give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever. It opens and closes with the same refrain. It opens and ends with the same statement. It's a bookend. It opens with thanksgiving, goodness, and love. Thanksgiving, goodness, and love. And the psalmist is using this particular song to remind the people to don't forget about the goodness of God. And he's pressing the issue, God is good. He's highlighting the fact that God is good. He's making it known God is good. When you read the entire psalm, he's encouraging Israel, the house of Aaron, and people who fear God to remember that God is good. He's saying, people, God is good. Priests, God is good. To the whole community, the psalmist, as the worship leader, is encouraging the whole group to remember how good God is. It's a psalm of thanksgiving. That means it's using this song to look back in the past, to remember what God has done, and then bring the past into the present. It's thanksgiving. Thanksgiving means when you thank God for what God has already done. is when one looks in the past and then you take that past and bring it to the present. I like what James Baldwin said, the great writer. He said, history is not merely about the past. History is present in everything we do. That means the act of remembering the past is when we take the past, we look back at it, we remember it, and then we bring that past into the present to give us encouragement at the moment. And so it's a time of reflection. The psalmist is encouraging the congregants and the congregation to look back in the past and pick out the moments when God has been good. Look back in your past and identify those experiences when God has been good to us. Look back in your past, highlight, pull from, draw from those victories, those past experiences when God has made a way, and allow that past to come to the present to give you encouragement and love right now. What I like about this particular psalm, that the psalmist does a wonderful job in identifying what goodness is. He says, we're giving thanks to God for he is good. The question is, what does the psalmist mean when he says that God is good? He makes it very clear. We're thanking God for his goodness. What made God so good in this particular psalm? A couple of things. Number one, God gives us a response. In verse 5, the psalmist says, I cried. In my time of distress, I cried. When I was hard pressed and had my back against the wall, the psalmist said, I cried. When I went through something in my life that brought me to tears, and when I cried, God responded. God did not ignore my cry. God did not run away from my hurt. My hurt drew God to me. My tears, God came and wiped my eyes. When I cried, God responded. God is so good that when I cried, God responded. He did not give me a deaf ear. God listened and God responded. It's a joy in knowing that when we cry, God will respond. Every time we're broken, we go through a major hurt or a major loss, and we go through something that brings us to tears, it's good to know that God will respond. God will respond to our cry. Our cries touches the heart of God. Our cry makes God respond to what we're going through right now. Don't ever underestimate God's ability to hear and respond to our cry. God will respond every time. What makes God move? Our tears. What makes God move on our behalf? Our tears. What makes God make a way? Our tears. So if you cried last night, God is moving. If you cried this week, God is moving. If you ever cried, God is moving in our behalf. The power behind our tears make God move. And the psalmist is shouting because he says God is good because God responds to our cry. The tears, the pain, the crying, the hurt, God responds. God is good because God responds to our cry. Number two, the psalmist says, God is good because God gives us refuge. In verses 6 through 14, he talks about refuge. He talks about being surrounded by enemies. He said, on every side, I was surrounded by nations and evil forces. Then he describes his enemies like swarming bees and a blaze of fire. He said, every time I turned around, I was surrounded by enemies, like bees swarming around honey. like fire blazing all around me. I was surrounded. He said, but God gave me refuge. He puts it like this: when I was surrounded by enemies, I cut them off in the name of the Lord. When I was surrounded by enemies like bees swarming around honey, he says, I cut them off in the name of the Lord. When I was surrounded by enemies like flame of fire, he says, I cut them off. In other words, when God covered me and God protected me, he cut me off from my enemies. In other words, he gave me victory. He's shouting because God gave him refuge. In the midst of the protection, his enemies could not touch him. His enemies could not harm him because God gave him protection. God is good because God becomes a refuge. He gives us covering. God gives us protection to where enemies, foes, and opposition can't hurt, harm, or do us any danger. He's shouting because God's ability to be a refuge, to be a source of protection, to build fences around us and give us his protection and his way of making us safe. And now the psalmist is rejoicing. He says, God is good because when I was surrounded by evil forces, God gave me the power to cut them off. They could not touch me. They could not bother me. David in the Psalms 23 puts it this way, that even in the presence of my enemy, God prepares a table. God will prepare a table in the presence of your enemies. Your enemies can't stop it. All they can do is watch God make a way in the midst of your life. There's refuge. They can't touch it. They can't harm it. They can't stop it. They got to watch God bless and make a way in your life. The psalmist is rejoicing because God is good. He responds to our cry, but he gives us refuge. Number 3, after God gives us a response and God gives refuge, God gives rescue. In verses 15 through 18, he talks about the right hand of God. He says the right hand of God performed mighty works, and the right hand of God is lifted. He talks about the right hand of God gave him victory and deliverance and brought him out of every tough circumstance. He says it was the right hand of God that made a way and performed the miracle. The right hand of God does mighty works, and the right hand of God is lifted. That when God does mighty works with his right hand, then we lift our hands in praise and thanksgiving. He said it was God's right hand that made a way out of Egypt. It was God's right hand that made a way through the Red Sea and provided dry ground to walk on. It was God's right hand that provided water in the desert. It was God's right hand that gave us food when we were hungry. He's shouting because God's right hand gave rescue. And when we are in trouble, and when we are bombarded by hurt and pain, and we feel like there's no way out, God gives rescue. God delivers, and God makes a way. The psalmist is rejoicing over the fact that God's right hand, that hand of power, knows how to deliver, knows how to reach down and grab us and pull us up and out of every situation. It's that act of deliverance. It's that act of rescue. It's God's way of bringing us out of stuff when we feel like we're sinking and we feel like quitting. But God can take that right hand, reach down and pull us up out of anything that we're going through right now. I don't know about you. I feel like shouting over God's ability to rescue and bring us out of tough situations. This past week, the sports world lost a giant, John Thompson, the former basketball coach of Georgetown, coached there almost 30 years. I grew up watching John Thompson, Big John, and the Georgetown Hoyas. I was listening to Allen Iverson, who played for John Thompson at Georgetown. He was giving his Hall of Fame speech. And in the middle of that speech, he paused and thanked John Thompson for saving his life. Allen Iverson said that when he was in high school, he played football and basketball, and he was recruited by every school in the country. But he went through something. He made a mistake in high school and got caught up in the law from a fight at a bowling alley. And when he went through his troubles, all the coaches and all the schools that once wanted him didn't want him anymore. No school in the country wanted to touch him. But his mother went to John Thompson and begged Coach Thompson to give her baby, Allen Iverson, another chance. And it was Coach Thompson who gave Allen Iverson another chance. And Iverson said, look at God. When folk gave up on me and nobody would give me another chance, it was John Thompson who came to the rescue and saved my life. And because he saved my life, now I'm being awarded entrance into the Basketball Hall of Fame. Iverson said, don't you tell me God ain't good. Oh, we can shout God is good when God rescues and gives us another chance. God is good when God can make a way and you feel like all hope is lost. But God comes in and comes through at the right time, in the right way, at the right moment. Anybody out there ever had your back against the wall and you thought it was over? You thought there was no way for you to come out of that situation, but God made a way, and God rescued and God delivered at the right time with the right person at the right moment, and God gave you what you needed at that time. Oh, Allen Iverson was right. Don't you tell me God ain't good. God is good. When God can move in that kind of situation, when God can bless us in spite of ourselves, God is good. The psalmist is right. God is good because God gives us a response to our cry. God is good because God gives us refuge. God is good because God gives us rescue. God knows how to bring us out, when to bring us out, and God will use whomever he will to make it happen. I don't know about you, but God is good. Somebody say, yeah. Well, I gotta go back and keep on shouting because I know one thing today and for the rest of this week, God is good. God bless you. Peace. I'll see you next Sunday.